We'd like to welcome all of our viewers and listeners to another Road to Wellness webinar. I'm Kathy Olevsky, and I'm the host of the Road to Wellness educational webinar series for the Vasculitis Foundation. I'm a patient, just like many of you, living with vasculitis. I was diagnosed with ANCA-MPA in 2008, and I was in treatment for 6 years, and I'm extremely grateful to have been in remission off treatment for 8 years. I hope to help the Vasculitis Foundation bring awareness to this disease. Our webinar topic today is the patient perspective of those living with cryoglobulinemia vasculitis. And I'd like to begin by introducing our speakers today. And first we have Csilla who was diagnosed with cryoglobulinemia in 2013, but she's been living with it since the 80s. She had been infected with HCV in her childhood via a tainted blood product, and the undiagnosed chronic infection triggered cryoglobulinemia and lymphoma. She worked at Beloit College as assistant to the provost for 17 years and has been disabled since 2015. And Csilla lived in Beloit, Wisconsin and Los Angeles, California, and is currently residing in Budapest, Hungary with her husband and 2 dogs. So also joining us today is Bob Newman. He's 66 years old and he lives about 30 miles from London in the UK with his wife, who has been his greatest support. Bob was diagnosed with Hep C and cryo type 2 positive in 2006. His Hep C was cured a year later. Unfortunately, curing the Hep C did not resolve the cryo issue. His treatment with rituximab didn't help. Bob continues to struggle with cold exposure, and Bob's varied outdoor work life ended prematurely at 57 years old with a total physical collapse after one too many cold exposures. So at that point, he had had cryo for about 5 years, and now he's a lifelong, any excuse, any season, any weather motorcyclist that maintains and rebuilds his own bikes. So welcome, Bob. We appreciate you being here today. We're just getting started and asking a few questions.
Hi, well, ask away.
Okay, well, welcome to our webinar today. And we're super grateful that you're here. And I feel like we really are needing to get the perspective of patients. And that's why we have this webinar planned. And I'm grateful to you for answering some of these questions honestly, so that other patients can know what your perspective of what your journey's been like in cryo. So
I'm really glad to, contribute whatever. It's an interesting journey, definitely.
Well, great. We do appreciate it. And I think what we're going to do is just dive right into some questions, and feel free to just let me know if there's anything that I didn't cover that you think that others would like to hear. But I think for starters, the best place to start is to ask you about early symptoms. So how did cryo begin to manifest for you, or what started and happened that alerted you that something was wrong?
Very early on, cryo started to manifest, but we didn't know what it was. I was just about as I was going through puberty, I started to have these weird rashes on my legs, and I had joint pains, and I lived in Hungary back then, and this was in the 70s. So people said, well, it's some sort of allergy. We don't know what it is. And then after I had my daughter when I was in 1981. I was not yet 20. And after I had my daughter, I had a huge flare, and I was covered in purpura. And I had, various parts of my body swell up, and they examined me all over. That was still in Hungary. So they examined me, and again, they said it's some sort of an autoimmune disease. We don't know what it is. We don't know what causes it. And pretty much my whole life, I moved to the States, and then I had my son in the States. This was in 1990. And when I was pregnant with my son, it started to affect my kidneys. And so basically, again, 1990, they didn't even know that there was something as Hep C. They didn't know that there was something as or at least nobody knew where I was, what cryoglobulinemia was. So they said, well, it looks like it has to do something because my rheumatoid numbers were really high. So they said, well, it has to do something with like rheumatoid arthritis or something, but we don't know. We don't know why the kidneys. We don't know what's going to happen. And basically, when I was 6 months pregnant, they said that I will have a 10% chance that both me and the baby is going to survive this. And then they offered that they were going to do an abortion. And I said, no, that's a baby. That's not. I had full-term pregnancy. I had an easy labor. And then, things sort of, so I just kept up basically for like over 40 years. I was having these weird symptoms and they got like really, really bad as I was going through menopause. And that's when finally in Los Angeles, I was diagnosed in 2013. So.
Wow, what a story to have lived with it that long. I mean, I know it's common in vasculitis patients that it takes so long to find something out. But let me just ask you a little bit more. I'm just changing my screen here. So in getting the diagnosis, talk about the challenges and issues and how exactly the diagnosis was made. Problems stemming from how rare it was to finding a doctor. Is always a cryo experienced doctor the best for you, or did you ever figure that out?
So I, as I said, for a long time, they didn't know what it was. And frankly, up until it really started to act up when I was in my early 50s, I just decided that this is something that I'm just living with, that I can't trust my own body, that, it was just like, this is something my body does. And, I keep on surviving it. So hopefully and then once we moved to Los Angeles from Wisconsin, that was like a big turning point, I think, because definitely the doctors in LA were more familiar with this type of thing, especially at UCLA. So then so right away as I showed them my rashes, and of course, they saw my kidney levels, they saw my liver levels, and then they immediately started to suspect. And you definitely are much better off with a doctor who is familiar with cryo. Yes.
Yes, understand. I'd like to start by asking you, just from the beginning, first early symptoms. So how did cryo begin to manifest for you, or what started to happen to you that alerted you that something was wrong?
I was perfectly healthy until my brother came to visit one winter evening. The visit went as normal. I went outside to see him back to his car. Spent about 5 minutes out there, started feeling unwell, barely made it back to the front door. The wife helped me back in. Within another 5 minutes, I was fully unconscious, apparently. And then that was the first time. That happened 2 or 3 more times until I'd wised up and made the connection. And since then, it's been the same every day since. Obviously, the weather changes, so severity changes, but it's still, if I'm losing body heat, I'm in trouble.
Wow. Okay, well, can you tell us a little bit about how you actually got the diagnosis? Like, talk about any challenges or issues and problems stemming from it being like a really rare disease?
Well, as I was saying to Ed earlier, I was suffering from fatigue, aches and pains, and at the end of one summer, I had purpura, like a purple stain all up my legs from feet to toe. That was enough to convince my local doctor that I had possibly cryo and possibly Hep C, because there's a known link. He sent me up to London to a immunologist that was familiar with Hep C originating cryo. One of his colleagues cured the Hep C. Unfortunately, the cryo didn't go with the Hep C, as it was usually expected to, and I'm stuck with it. The next course of action was to suppress the B cells, where the cryo problem basically originates from, with rituximab. That didn't work either. Not from my point of view. It made a blip on their tests, but from my experience, personal experience, it made no difference at all. So from then on, once they'd run out of answers, we literally shook hands and he wished me good luck, and off I went. It's been that way for the last 13 odd years.
So do you have a cryo-specific doctor now that you deal with, somebody that's very knowledgeable about cryo?
The first guy I saw was basically top of the tree, as far as the community his hospital is in. He's surrounded by Hep C laden. He's a Hep C laden community, so he is very familiar with Hep C cryo.
Okay.
Since then, my local rheumatologist, when I transferred to her for convenience and basically for monitoring, that's when I found out how rare it was, because she'd only ever seen 6 cases in her life, and none of those had been walking, talking. So I was as much of a shock to her as she was to me.
So does she stay up to date on cryo, and do you feel like she's knowledgeable enough to treat you?
Her virtue is that she is interested, she believes what I'm telling her, and is skeptical that she's skeptical. She's curious. She wants to prove yes or no. If I were, the current situation is, if I were to induce purpura on the legs by putting them in cold water for a few hours, that would pretty much clinch it for her. But the problem is, with cryo blood testing, when I was first diagnosed, the immunologist was surprised that I was walking, talking, because of how high CRP levels were and rheumatoid factor were, when at the time I was just struggling to lead a normal life. Now that I can't lead a normal life, my blood tests are the opposite. So my original immunologist thinks he follows the blood tests and says, no, there's nothing wrong, despite the symptoms. I've got another professor, his opinion is that, well, once positive, always positive, and as you've got the symptoms, if we devised another test, we could probably prove it. But now that the COVID situation is about, it's a case of, do I want to be immunosuppressed, or in order to get rid of the cryo symptoms, possibly, or just deal with what I know. And at the moment, I'm veering towards dealing with what I know and keeping my immune system intact, even if it is defective. At least it's all there.
Yeah. Csilla, you're agreeing, so some of this sounds very familiar to you.
Yeah, definitely. You know, what he pointed out, that sort of going on any sort of immunosuppression in the middle of a pandemic is, you know, it's a very risky deal. And, you know, I myself had been treated with rituximab, and I'm not saying as a result, but, you know, at that time I got Legionnaire's disease, and that almost killed me, because, you know, and that's just the reality for us. Yeah.
Yes. Anything in addition to what you already have is
exactly.
So if you could both talk a little bit about, maybe we'll go with you, Csilla, first, about how you reacted when you initially found out finally what your diagnosis was, and what was it like for you in those first few days as you realized what cryo was?
So actually, it's funny because you know, you finally get the diagnosis, and that's great because, you know, I spent my whole life just dealing with the fact that my body is weird and does strange things, and I can't rely on it for, you know, I can't just work out because a workout can cause a huge, you know, outbreak of rashes, or, you know, my whole life I barely ever went to the beach because, you know, I was always covered with these unsightly red splotches. And, you know, I mean, to an untrained eye, it looks like something that can very easily be communicable. So, yes. And, you know, when I was in my 20s and 30s, you know, that was the kind of thing where, you know, no one saw me without like a long pair of pants, you know. So finally I got a diagnosis. And because mine was also Hep C related, at first, you know, there was a big, great hope that once the Hep C is cured, then, you know, the cryo will go away. Of course, you know, by this point, my kidneys were greatly reduced, my kidney function. So I mean, soon after I was diagnosed, I went through several months of hospitalization and kidney biopsies and plasmapheresis, and then that got that space, you know, they put on a space here, yes. You know, that's where they take out your blood. So that got infected, and I got a heart infection. So that almost killed me. And then they cured my Hep C, which was, I was the first person at UCLA who actually got the newly approved Hep C medication back in 2014 at the beginning. Wow. It was approved by the FDA in 2013, and this was at the beginning of 2014 that I was cured. And so that was a big deal. That was a big deal for everyone, especially because no one was sure that I'm gonna pull through, and then I did. So you know, I was relieved when I was diagnosed, and then right away it was just like one thing after the other. It was really sort of the 24th hour or 11th hour or whatever.
Yeah, the perspective on that is just something that I never thought about before. I did want to also ask you, I'm going to come back to this in just a second I want to talk about seasons and stuff and how that affects you. Mm-hmm. But I did want to ask you both, since we know that cryo, or experts say cryo's not curable, but remission is possible. Are either of you currently in remission, do you think?
No, never have been.
So you've never been in remission?
No.
Yeah.
What do you think, Csilla?
I have been in remission now, keeping both of my fingers. I have been in remission now pretty much for 3 years, you know, so I haven't had to take any medication for the cryo, which is now I haven't been on any immunosuppressants or anything of that sort. And I can actually, so I spent like a winter here in Hungary, and, you know, it's winter here. I mean, not very cold, not like Wisconsin, but, you know, there was some snow. And I was really concerned how that's gonna affect me, but it hasn't really. So I have to be careful. I mean, a lot more careful than other people. But I haven't had a flare now for 3 years. So that's amazing.
Pretty awesome.
I
wish that continues for you. I very much wish that continues. And Bob, I hope you'll get there too. I've been lucky enough to be a vasculitis patient in remission for 6 years. So let the good times roll.
Yes.
I did want to ask you both about seasons, and you just sort of addressed it a little bit, Csilla, so I'll go to Bob. Are there seasons in the UK where you're less likely to be as concerned about, getting cold really quickly from moving from room to room or outside or anything like that?
Ooh, it's a year-round issue. Every day, every hour, day or night, it's a year-round issue. You can have the cold exposure varies from very cold, very brutal, very significant symptoms to not even very cold, not even very significant symptoms until you do it every day. And then by the end of the month or the end of the week, you are much worse off than you were on Monday. And when that cycle doesn't get broken, then the whole thing just gets worse. And when it comes to summer, since my issues have become more acute, when it gets hot in summer and sweating becomes unavoidable, being sweaty in a breeze is losing body heat in exactly the same way that being sweaty in a chilly breeze is in winter. And the results are exactly the same and equally devastating and equally quick and equally unpleasant. That's in bright sunny day, just damp clothes in a breeze. Moving from sun to shade, being in full sunshine with the old infrared warming your skin up, moving into some deep shade, that's cold exposure. The fact that it's still 25, 26 degrees is neither here nor there. The loss of that direct sunshine, that's cold exposure. Sitting in a draft, any breeze for any time, I can sit in my living room with the back door open in a nice cool, in a 22-degree room, no problem, sit there all day. If I go and sit outside where the air's moving, I'll be in trouble within a couple of hours because I'm losing body heat, not because I'm getting cold. I mean, I'm still nice and warm, but the process of losing body heat is going on, and my little cryo monster wakes up and goes, "Oh, he's leaking body heat. I'll just nick a bit of energy and throw a bit of grit in the joints and foggy his brain up a bit," and that just carries on until he goes to my little monster goes, "Oh, he's warming up again. I'll ease it off a bit then." So that's when the foggy brain comes in, the lack of energy. All my symptoms I can put down to the precipitate being spiky, which is what my original immunologist told me, because my arthritic problems are only ever a symptom of cold exposure. They're not a daily warm life problem. And poor oxygen supply, brain, the panting after minimal energy. On a healthy day, I can go and mow the garden. After I've had enough cold exposure, I can't even get off the sofa. And if I can, it takes me 3 hours of panting to get over it. All my symptoms, the blue skin colour, the nails that turn white and don't turn pink again, you name it. Everything points to low sats. In fact, it got so bad, that's why I bought the pulse oximeter. Right. Although it's useful when I'm feeling just a little bit under colour, it got so low that it freaked my roomie out, and that's basically what made her take a bigger interest.
Well, as usual, your answers give us great perspectives, so I appreciate that. Things that a lot of us would never have thought about.
And can I jump in with one more thing? So I think that summer has its own issues because, especially in the United States, because air conditioning.
Yes.
So if you ever get on a bus, if you ever get in someone else's car, if you ever go, like you should have seen me going to the movies in Los Angeles in the middle of the summer. I was going on an Arctic trip with like a scarf and a hoodie and a fleece and 2 socks, and everyone else is just sitting there in this, and I was just freezing. So it was and actually I worked at UCLA, and there was some air conditioning, not high, some air conditioning in the building. And by the time 5 o'clock came on, my hands were numb. I couldn't perform office functions. And then my legs were numb up until my knee. So I was always afraid that I was walking to the parking garage in the blazing sun. I couldn't feel my feet, my legs as I was walking. I always thought that I'm going to fall now and break something because I didn't feel my legs. And then I went to the parking garage in the heat, and it was like 90 degrees. And I turned on the heat in the car. And I was trying to like warm up my hands so that I can drive home.
You asked about.
Go right ahead.
You're asking about seasonal problems. The purpura up both my legs that I got diagnosed with only happened after I'd spent the entire summer in shorts and bare feet. My only assumption is that gentle wind chill all summer just blocked my veins up, and hey presto, purpura. And the problem now, of course, is that when the doctor says, "Have you had purpura lately?" and I say no, the assumption is, "Oh, you haven't got cryo then," when in reality I simply haven't been wearing short trousers ever since.
Exactly.
Well, that's interesting, because I was just going to ask you, are there certain things that you have learned that help you deal with this, or tricks? Because Steph Lee told us about a few things like that, but that sounds like one of them. You learned that you can't walk around in shorts and bare feet. Is there anything else, Bob, that you want to say of something that you've learned to do that keeps you centered and keeps you at the temperature you need to be?
Learn to lead a new life.
Learn to what? Sorry.
Lead a new life.
Lead a new life.
Yeah.
You need a whole new philosophy.
Right.
I mean, I'm physically able. I could go to work, don't get me wrong. But if I leave the house at 7 o'clock in the morning and it's a bit chilly, I'm going to be useless by 10. I'm going to be sackable by 11.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be a danger driving home at 12.
Right.
And that's another thing that doesn't get mentioned because of the foggy brain aspect. It's a bit like drinking too much. You think, oh, that hasn't made a lot of difference, I'll have another one. And while you keep on doing that, you keep on thinking, well, that hasn't made a lot of difference, until in the end, you're a liability. And that's how it is with oxygen deprivation, for want of a better word, which makes it pretty dangerous. I mean, there are times it got to the stage before work became impossible. People were stopping me from driving home because, in their judgment, I wasn't safe to drive.
Right.
And for people, these are customers, not workmates. These are just customers that were coming back after their work to make sure I didn't drive home, because that's how it gets. Well, I've got a life to lead. I've got commitments. I've got bills. Blah, 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 blah. I'll struggle through it. And if that involves driving home, well, like any drunk idiot, you do it.
Well, it sounds like just the comment of lead a new life is, it sounds like every vasculitis patient I've talked to, honestly, we all know that we're not going back to who we were, that we're leading a new life, but it's particularly important because of these things. Csilla, did you have something that you do that, I mean, you said, about going into the parking deck and turning the heat on in the car, but are there things besides bundling up in the movie theater that helped you to learn to deal with this? Any tricks?
Well, I wouldn't have survived Wisconsin without 2-hour-long hot baths. So I feel like, subconsciously, and back then I didn't know what I had, but I just knew that by the time I got home from work, again, in the winter time, I was numb, I was tired, I was, past being useful. I was also a single mother of 2 kids. So it was very, very, and my whole family being in Hungary, including the kids' father who came back to Hungary. So I was a single mother suffering from this weird, collection of symptoms that no one knew what to do. But I did know that once I got home from work, I went to the bathtub for an hour and I sort of emerged a new woman and now I know that, that hot water sort of dissolved all the cryo crystals or, whatever. Also doing a lot of dishwashing in hot water.
Accomplishing two things at once. Good job. But you spent basically, after getting diagnosed, you were just like overwhelmed with everything that happened right after that in the hospital and all the treatment and everything.
Yes. Yes.
Understood. And I'm going to ask you basically the same thing, Bob. Did you have, like when you finally got the diagnosis and knew what it was, what was your immediate reaction? Were you scared, or were you just like Csilla, just so involved in the treatment that,
Well, first off, I was healthy right up until that first instance that left me unconscious. I mean, because that happened a couple of times, I was fully aware from there on in that I had a problem with cold exposure. The fact that I'd gone to my local doctor who referred me to a specialist who treated it as fairly normal, I had no concept of what rareness was until I met my rheumatologist. Remind me the question again. Completely lost my plot.
That was you were answering exactly as I expected. But basically, how did you feel when you found out it was rare?
I wasn't really that bothered, to be honest, because I knew what my problem was, and I knew that by avoiding cold exposure I could deal with it. So when the doctor said, "Oh, you've got this, and that's what's causing your cold exposure problems," I wasn't really that bothered. Even when it turned out that they couldn't cure the problem, I wasn't really that bothered, because I could still drag what then was relatively a small ball and chain around through my life and deal with it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a big deal. And I've been a biker all my life. This sort of life's full of potential hazards that might and might not, and you just live with it. It was a challenge. I'm a guy, it was a challenge.
Great perspective, Bob.
My wife wasn't impressed, because one of the things that he did stress was that losing my feet was a possibility. Well, like I say, being a biker, the possibility of losing my legs and whatever else it's always been possible. It didn't bother me. No. But whereas the gory stuff, like the loss of organs, the the brain damage, whatever else, no, it's just another one of life's hazards. I didn't worry about it, mainly because I knew what the trigger is, and the trigger is cold exposure. And the other thing about this cryo, because it's thermally unstable, it's either nicely dissolved at body temperature, or it's a trouble precipitate below body temperature. I'm one of the lucky ones for whom staying warm actually would appear to redissolve the problem away, whereas with a lot of other people that have cryo, depending on what their primary illness is, if that illness is what's triggering the precipitation, it doesn't work quite as simply as that. And even people with Hep C, not all of them will say, "Oh yeah," most of them will say, "Oh yeah, staying warm does me good." But for me, it's the difference between life and death, literally. Others will say, "Yeah, it's marginal benefit." Cryo really is different for everybody.
Yeah, I've been learning that just since our first webinar that we did. So I also want you two to know that you can talk back and forth to each other, ask each other questions if you want to in the midst of the questions. And Csilla, if Bob's saying something that you agree with or disagree with or have an opinion on, please feel free to jump in. Okay. But I did want to say...
I would like to say hi, Csilla.
Hi, Bob. Nice to see you finally in live.
Well, okay. Your friendship is just going to help us do even a better program for everybody. So that's great. So, Csilla, back to you. We would especially like to know about what Bob was just talking about with colds, temperatures, environment, and how that impacted your life too. Is it like a daily thing, or how do you adapt to find the ways to, cope with the problems with the cold?
It was absolutely, I wouldn't say daily necessarily all the time, but, I lived in Wisconsin for over 20 years. And of course, you don't know this. And mine wasn't very specific. Actually, I had a really hard time tolerating heat as well. So one version of this cryo illness is that the body doesn't regulate temperature very well. So I couldn't sweat. So in the summer, I got like overheated and I got the same rashes as I would in the cold when I get. So neither hot nor cold was good for me. But I remember going through those horrible Wisconsin winters, and I just felt sort of lazy and stupid because I just felt like I was living in a fog. And I was always joking that I just want to hibernate because I can't think, I like everything is just takes me so much longer. And that, so, once you get diagnosed and you look back of all the things that happened to you, all the things that, why that happened and how that hindered you. And then it's all clear, but somehow you can live with it. And because you don't know that this even exists, you just ignore it. Like both of my kids were playing soccer, and I would go out on an early fall night to watch their soccer games. And everyone was just in like little tank tops and shorts. And I was like long pants, and my hands started to go numb and my feet started. They're like, how can you sit here? So, I mean, I always knew that there was something like weird. So I took a lot of hot baths in the winter.
When we spoke with Steph Lee earlier, she was saying that she wears heated clothing, and she can push a button in her. Have you tried any of that?
No. I mean, I lived in Beloit in the 90s, so there was no heated
clothing back then. How about you, Bob? Do you have any things that you want to share about how you deal with staying warm? So since the cold, Csilla said it was cold and extreme heat. For you, obviously it's the cold and you like to stay warm to, prevent it from causing a problem. So what do you do to help with that?
Okay, well, for a little bit of clarity. Cold is a relative term. Cold is always something lower temperature than something else. And from my cryo point of view, cold is anything about 5 or more degrees below body temperature.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you would consider cold is almost Arctic to me. And if I don't take the relevant precautions, then I will suffer Arctic type symptoms. My blood flows, it gets completely out of hand. And as Csilla was saying about the foggy brain, one of the problems with the precipitate, when it is no longer just a nice little liquid in your serum and it's actually a lump of stuff floating around in your system, it occupies space that would normally be occupied by oxygen carrying cells. And because it is either fibrous, gelatinous or crystalline, there's an inevitable thickening effect on the blood that leads to slower flow and marginally lower oxygen saturation. Now, in my case, both of those are obvious. I've measured them. They're just completely obvious. Other people would say it's less of a problem for them. My SATs, by the end of winter, I expect my SATs to be bouncing around the 80% mark. And my blood pressure will be all the way through the roof. Simply because of not because of any one cold exposure, but because without enough time to redissolve the ones that were already in my system, a fresh daily input is just adding up to the amount that's in there until in the end, a dripping tap fills a bucket in the end and there's an overflow and everything gets messy. And that's how it is for me. And the other irony of that, of course, that makes life a little bit difficult is that it's most likely that's the problem in winter. But then there's several ambulance crews have actually opted to leave me, because cold is a trigger and because it's so cold outside, they'd rather leave me indoors wrapped up in a blanket and phone back later to see how I get on, rather than risk taking me out in the ambulance to hospital. And the last visit with my rheumatologist was entirely based around, are you going to keep me warm here if I end up here? Because if you don't, you'll lose me anyway. Kind of, I understand.
Interestingly, anything, might be a weird question, but you touched on it a little bit with your foggy brain and drinking. So I'm going to come back to it. Is there any food or drink or the temperature of a drink or something that triggers this in you. How about you, Bob?
If you're taking in a cold liquid, there's a good chance that it's going to pass very close to some blood vessels in your throat, your nose. If you're breathing cold air, bones are excellent at conducting heat and cold, so that cold will be transferred to the blood in your throat. And a few of us do have speaking problems after drinking cold fluids, sore throats, headaches from breathing cold air. It's all completely reasonable. But yeah, those symptoms do vary. And the other problem with taking hot baths, of course, is that if it's not warm in the bathroom when you get out the bath, there's your first cold exposure straight away. And then if the bedroom's not warm when you move into there, there's another one. So you're already back on the downhill slide straight after getting out the bath.
Hot water bottles are your best friends.
Hot water bottles. You know, did you have any, do you just feel the same way about food that's too hot or too cold, Csilla, or do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, like I didn't have that kind of extreme reaction to cold food or drinks. My symptoms were pretty much below neck, I would say, for the most part. Somehow my headspace, other than my brain, of course, didn't seem to be too affected by it. So, but I know a lot of people in our group complain about, like they can't have ice cream or they can't have anything cold to drink.
Okay. And I'm going to stop for just a second and say, are you two okay to hang in here for about another 10 minutes?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
You okay with that, Csilla? I know it's late where you are, but we're getting such good stuff. So if that's okay, I'm
a night owl.
Okay, good. Well, I did want to jump back to somewhere I started into a minute ago, but we got in such a good conversation. But how does this affect your families? Like, partner, children, parents, like how does your disease affect them? Csilla, you want to start?
Yeah, so my husband has been, so I'm married again, and and my husband has been my rock. I mean, he went through this with me. I don't know how I could have done it without him. And, I have two grown children, and especially my daughter who was living in LA near us, she really helped a lot too. And so, back in 2013, 2014 and 15, I think that's when I sort of really hit rock bottom with this. I had kidney failure. I had, so, there was like a lot of stuff that made it very questionable whether I'm going to come out of this. And then I ended up with lymphoma too, on top of all of it, also as a courtesy of Hep C. So, when you just get like one, and because my kidneys were bad, I had gout, and because of the gout, I had to have one of my toes amputated. So, like all this stuff just keeps on happening, and then you just like, there is never, and they were like, we're gonna get through this, and we did. So.
So it's great that you had such great support. How about you, Bob? Any family or friends that you felt like it affected or changed your relationship?
It's completely changed my life. So by consequence, it's obviously changed my wife's life completely. Going anywhere. I mean, Cilla's talking about getting wrapped up and everything else, but I'm at the situation where that's just not enough. So cold prevention tactics don't involve getting wrapped up. They involve staying indoors and just avoiding the situation, because the percentage of chances of it going wrong are just too high. Mm-hmm. The little things. I mean, I've been maintaining engines and stuff all my life. For me to even be considering being in an automobile association is farcical. But because of my cryo situation, if my car breaks down or I have an accident or something, I've actually gone for the full recovery to my house cover, not because I'm worried about the car, but because if that accident happens somewhere like alongside a motorway, where I know from experience that being out of your car is the safest place to be, and that happens to be in the evening, I want that lorry, I don't care about the car, I know that he'll be there when I need him to take me back home in a nice warm cab. Whether he brings the car as well or not, I really don't care. That's the situation I'm in, because if I wait until he turns up and then I'm not feeling well and he says, well, you need an ambulance, mate, and another 10 minutes for the ambulance, I could be a stretcher case by then.
Right.
So, you know, the implications are enormous. And obviously, does it affect my wife? Yes, it does, because if we go out with friends, it's no good saying, sorry, lads, we can't sit out the front because it's a bit drafty. We've got to go inside when there's 15 of you all want to have a yahoo out on the patio. Now, that's no good, so you don't do that either. You know, and on my friends, because I was single for up until I was 50-something, most of my friends, I was a visitor, not the visited, because they all had family and kids and I didn't. So it was a bike ride, you know, it was. Well, can't do that anymore. That's all gone. You know, the motorbike's still in the shed. I was looking at it this morning. It's a lovely day, but the simple truth is that no matter how much clobber I wear, the windshield will get me. And if it happens too quick, I'm now riding around on a motorbike with a foggy brain. Yeah. It's not a winning combination. In fact, the only two safe places left these days are my house and my car, because the house I can come back indoors and stay warm, and if I'm away from home, my car is an airtight environment. There's no drafts. I can gently put the heating on so that the airflow's not too fast and chill me and all that sort of stuff. It's a secure environment, and if I'm lucky, it's even been parked in the sunshine, and it is so hot nobody else will get in there. Yeah, that is purely because of Cryo. You know,
well, thanks for that very candid answer.
When it comes to instant family, like my wife and her kids that see this thing all the time, the best thing I did was be in the living room on the settee. It kept me in touch with the world, and it let those people see for themselves what I was dealing with. It mean to say that they actually learned anything from it, but at least they're aware and know how badly this can go wrong if they don't do simple things like close the windows or shut the door or whatever other stupidity people get up to.
Right. You know, what's also really interesting is that, as Bob pointed out, that, you know, waiting for an ambulance or even in LA, where I went to UCLA, where like a lot of people do know cryo and have had experience with cryo patients, you know, you always have to advocate yourself, you know, because they want to ice you, you know, like it's just like sort of basic things that they tell everyone that, and even though they know that you have cryo, it just doesn't click because it's so rare. So, or, you know, like I go for a CT or go for whatever else, and then, you know, I'm there in like a gown and it's freezing, and so you really have to. I often think, you know, what happens when I'm like 80, if I live that long, or 85, and then won't have enough brains to sort of fight for my, you know?
Yeah. I guess that's when you always have somebody with you and family and friends fight for you. But, you know, interesting that you brought that up, because I was just going to ask about like the healthcare systems in various countries. Now, Csilla, you were in the United States for a long time and you're back in Hungary. How are you navigating? Are the healthcare systems, obviously they're different, but how are you navigating? What's the differences? The upsides and downsides?
Well, you know, they are very different, and I'm really, really glad that I was diagnosed in the United States. I think in Hungary, I would have had a much harder time getting even diagnosed, let alone treated. Now that, you know, the cryo is, so I found a doctor here in Hungary too, who actually he is like a nephrologist, because, you know, the cryo has really affected my kidneys the most. Sort of my primary point doctor for me has been my nephrologist in the States. And so I'm seeing a nephrologist here too, who is also familiar with cryo and the Hep C related aspect of it. And then, like everyone at UCLA that I saw was, like it's a very nicely integrated system. So all the doctors could look into my online files, so they could see each other's notes, they could see each other, all my test results, everything. So from that standpoint, I was really, really lucky. I was really, really lucky. So many people don't have that. I really had access to sort of the best doctors there. And now, now basically I have lymphoma and I have kidney disease, and the cryo is in remission, and none of my diseases right now are in a stage that I need like active, care or so I go my checkups here too, and hopefully things keep on going well.
Well, good. How about, this is just me being curious, the differences between the two countries and insurance and cost of prescriptions and cost of doctors, things like that?
Well, insurance is expensive in the United States. So that, that was really hard. We had some expenses, especially because I had to quit my job at UCLA. Mm-hmm. When I was diagnosed, there was like a 6 month probation time that I was working there. And it was about month 4 of the 6 months that I was diagnosed. And then my kidneys were going downhill so badly that, and frankly, I was in no shape to work either. But like after I ended up in the hospital, like I worked whole days with like a blood pressure of 250 over 125. But sometimes I just couldn't go into work. And then basically they were telling me that they are not going to renew my contract because of absenteeism. And so I had to quit. And so that was the beginning of me not having, I still had insurance, but I had to pay COBRA, which was like $700 out of my pocket when I had no income other than my husband's. So that was a really hard part in my life. Now here, you pay, like I can participate in the Hungarian healthcare system. And that's I pay for myself about $30 a month. And then most of it is free. Now I can go to private doctors, but even if I go to private doctors, like I had a little nodule removed from my temple. We thought that might be also cancerous. And then I just went to a private clinic. This was in the middle of COVID. So, they didn't do like all non-essential surgeries were suspended for a while. And then I went to a private clinic and they did that. And I mean, that was about $250, to remove that and send it through, the examination and whatever. So that's not too bad.
Okay. How about you, Bob? Is there any I mean, you may not know any other system, but like, how's the healthcare system been for you there?
Fantastic.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's a great answer. We don't always get that answer in the United States. So I'm grateful for that answer. Hey, I did want to ask you both, since you're both in that same social media group, like, talk about social media and is there anything else, like, does the social media help you specifically relate to each other, or is it more about helping other people? And then the last thing, I'll come back to the next question. So tell me a little bit about, like, the social media group and how it works for you, or are you just helping other people, do you think? How about you, Bob?
I spent the first 8 years of my cryo life as the only person that I was the only person in the world with cryo. The only people that knew about it were my doctor that I saw about once a year and my rheumatologist that I saw every 6 months for a half-hour conversation. And to be honest, while they understand the technical side of things, that's in a hospital environment. They have no concept about living with cryo at all. However, as I said to Ed earlier, I went down to my local doctor with the 3 things that were the weakness, the arthralgia, and the purpura. He was a French guy, an old French doctor. He predicted probably cryo, probably due to Hep C, and packed me off to the specialist in London, where life just carried on as normal. That's how it works out. As for the systems, and one of the concepts. So then, the first benefit of joining Cryo Secret was that, I mean, let's be honest, the idea that getting cold exposed can make you ill is fairly ludicrous. You know, it's not the sort of you pop in a normal conversation.
Yeah.
It's hard to justify in your head in some senses. So there's that permanent question: is it just in my head? Is it just me? Am I a Fruit Loop? Am I hypochondriac? But when you find out that, well, when I joined, there were a couple of hundred other people that also had cryo and had cold exposure problems. What a relief! Great. Yeah. At least I'm not a Fruit Loop. Yeah, that is, that'll put a step in anyone's day. And then from there on in, it's also big. I mean, I didn't write anything beyond my name between leaving school and joining Cryo Secret. There was no need. Since joining that, I've done a lot of writing for the group, mainly because I've got a fairly good understanding of how cryo works for me and can express it. It keeps people amused, which adds a certain amount of levity to what is usually a fairly miserable subject. And people get to share their experiences. Now and again, it prompts someone to go, oh, wow, that's exactly me. Thanks for writing that. Well, why wouldn't you do things like that?
That's amazing.
But the downside, there is a downside to being in a group, which is when you speak to your doctor, because as soon as you say 200 people in my cryo group say X, Y, Z, the first thing they say is, I don't believe that you know 200 people because I've only ever met 2 in my career. And the second thing they say is, well, yeah, but that's web doctoring, and we don't like web doctoring, so I'm going to completely disregard that. And then they just go back to their dogmatic, limited experience, no idea, maybe had 5 minutes in a med school lesson 15 years ago, never seen a cryo case in their life, but they know best. And that's the next problem about having cryo. What Csilla was saying about being your best advocate. Pre-cryo, my medical history was basically break something, get to hospital, get it fixed, leave again. Get legally drugged and bastard, basically. That's the name of the game. And for the routine stuff, you get the routine staff that do the routine stuff under the supervision of somebody that's done lots of it, and everybody's happy. But when you start getting things like cryo and things like blood tests, because it's rare, the people that do the blood test don't even always know how to do it. So you really do need to be your own best advocate, because if you don't know how to do the blood test properly and you let the phlebotomist do it wrongly, there's a good chance get a false negative.
Right. In
a doctor's life, tests are either positive or negative. And if you are extremely positive, that's how ill you are. And if you're negative, you're not ill. So if you are actually ill and you're just not ill because somebody in the lab or technician has made a mistake or just didn't want to read the instructions or had a bad day that day, there's your future health gone straight out the window. And your credibility.
Understood. Csilla, any thoughts about the social media group? You're very active in it, especially right now.
Well, I really, for me, because I felt trapped in my unpredictable, uncooperative body as a complete weirdo for most of my life. And my body produced things that no one else's body did, and I didn't know what prompted it. I didn't know how to handle it. And so when I found the group, and I found like several hundred people there who, and like you should see the questions like, does it happen to you guys? And of course it happens, like, have you ever experienced this? And yes, and so to find all these people and see pictures of like, oh my God, that looks just like my legs used to look like. And I learned more in that group in the first week of my membership than from all of my doctors who are familiar with cryo. It's like the lived experience and sort of hearing what works for people and what doesn't. I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to take in, but I've also heard that from other people in their social media groups with regard to other forms of vasculitis. Hey, I have one final question for both of you. There will be doctors watching this. There will be researchers watching this. Is there something you want to say to them? Cryo is rare among rare. I mean, vasculitis is rare. Cryovasculitis is rare, rare, rare. So is there anything that you want to say to them about trials, studies, drugs, anything?
Okay, mine's Hep C cryo, Hep C as the primary illness. I've tried, not very hard, but I have tried to get in touch with groups like Fight Hep C or Cure Hep C or whatever they are. Now, the simple fact of life is that 25 to 50% of people with Hep C will have a detectable cryoglobulins in their system. Only a few of those will have symptoms bad enough that they'll mention to their doctor, and even fewer of those will have symptoms to the level that I'm at. But those Hep C do-gooder groups don't even want to talk to me. I can't even get a confirmation that, oh yeah, well, no, their attitude is, no, there's no link, go away. And yet that is definitely not the case. That's a bit galling and makes me, it's one of the reasons I've done this, so that I can actually air that frustration somewhere. And from a doctor's point of view, I totally have their sympathy, because it's people experience cryo differently depending on what their primary underlying cause is, of which there are many.
Right.
And then from a little reading I was doing the other day, the fact that the precipitate can either be fibrous, gelatinous, or crystalline, there's a pretty good chance that they'll produce different symptoms. So now we've got a possible, and that can be for each of the three types, any of those kinds of precipitate across the three types. Now, so I do sympathise with the difficulty doctors have, but I don't sympathise with their, we know best and we really don't like the patient knowing more than we do.
Well, that's a very important message, just to give at least that piece of it. Csilla?
In fact, when it comes to being self-advocating, would you consider asking your doctor how much experience they have of your particular problem? No, you wouldn't, would you? You just assume they're the expert and away you go. But by asking a rheumatologist or somebody about cryo that question, how they react will tell you a lot about whether they know their stuff or whether they're just flogging you a deadline. And that, again, is vital for you. If you can't tell the difference, then your health can go from better or worse depending on how that doctor treats you. It's ridiculous.
Well, I actually have a kind of a funny story about this, because, one of my doctors in LA is a rheumatologist. Now, she should be maybe my first doctor because of the vasculitis, rheumatology nature of this. But as I said, for me, my kidneys have been the biggest problem. So that's why, my nephrologist is the main point person for me. But anyhow, so I go like every 3 months when I'm in the States, I go and see the rheumatologist too for just a checkup. And, she's always like, so, do you have any questions? And she asks a few questions, and she asked this question. So she says, so when you have a flare, do you always have a purpura or a rash or sometimes it's only your kidneys that get involved? And I was like, that's exactly a question that I was going to ask you. So it's, you know, my advice to the doctors would be ask a lot of questions, because some of the manifestations of this disease are so weird that like it would never have occurred to me to mention that my fingers get like really numb when it's cold, because fingers get numb when it's cold, you know, like it's just so weird that, you know, like if you think that, like, none of my doctors ever told me to, okay, don't drink cold, or don't go into the draft, or, you know, like they don't think about it. But this is stuff that you have to, like, anytime they had some procedure on me, now I'm getting that bear hug, you know, it's like, how do you call that, Bob? You know,
Quilt, like a wraparound blanket.
And they blow like hot air underneath it, because, you know, the operating rooms are like usually very cold.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a new one on me.
But you have to advocate for that. So this is the kind of stuff that if you get an IV, you know, don't put the cold IV into that person. Warm it up. That kind of stuff.
Yes, because it will be body temperature once it gets in your arm. So there's no argument against not warming up at least to room temperature.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, my first infusion was horrendous because it was cold. Didn't do it at all.
So you've obviously, I was just going to say, you've obviously both learned that you are your own best advocate, and that you have to push these things forward to make sure that you're taken care of. The Facebook group that you have seems to be what tied you two together. So if there are cryo patients watching this video and that group would be of benefit to them, how do they find out? Maybe you could give the name of the Facebook group and tell them the procedure for joining it. Csilla, maybe go ahead. Just type in cryoglobulinemia into your browser. It will probably bring up Alliance for Cryo, and you start from there. Once you get into that, that's like a gateway group, and then once you are in there, you get into the hardcore.
Once you get there, you will meet me or Marianne, and we are going to vet you so you can go into the secret group or not.
So I did hear from you guys that there's a group that they call a secret group, because no one that's not in the group, everyone in the group has cryo. There's no extra people. And
they're an advocate for somebody that has cryo, like a carer or something like that. But if you haven't got cryo, no entry.
And it's a secure group in that the comments you make in there cannot be seen outside of there, correct?
Not only the comments, even the existence of the group cannot be found unless we invite someone.
Okay, and how do they do that again? So they go on Facebook and they type something in, is that what you said?
They type in Alliance for Cryoglobulinemia, and then that's not a secret group. But then once there is like a little questionnaire that they have to fill out. And one of the questions is, do you have cryo? And you also have to agree to the rules of the group, because there are some discussion rules that people have to keep. And so once they do that, if somebody indicates that they have cryo, then we offer them that they can join the secret group if they want to.
Okay. Well, thanks for all that information. I did want to say that first of all, I have to tell everybody else that's watching this that you guys are up very late in your time zone. And we greatly appreciate you hanging in there through all of my questions, because as soon as you said something, there was something else that I had to ask you. So you guys are the reason that my various questions kept coming up. And now, again, thanks to both of you so much, especially for staying up late, because our viewers don't know, because they're going to watch this on their time and they're not going to know that you were up till 11 or 12.
It's my pleasure. You know, I really think that it's so important for me to sort of reach as many people as possible, because I know my journey was miserable being alone, and I really hope that, you know, as the group now has over 500 people, and wow. And we are, every week there are new people who find us, so it might not be as rare as people think.
Well, I'm sure it's both a blessing and something that just like really makes you think that there are that many people that have cryo, but good that they're all in one place where you guys can support each other. So that's pretty awesome.
We are an untapped resource, I'm sure, for someone who is interested in sort of researching in this area.
Yeah, that's a point. Actually, at most of my appointments now, I do ask if they would like to question up to 400 or 500 cryo patients, and usually all I get is a couple laugh, and the usual that many don't exist.
Yeah.
But, well, apparently they do.
Sorry?
Apparently they do, and you know them all. So this is great that you will be making those people available to any researchers and doctors that are listening. So I again, just can't thank you enough. I also, though, need to thank our sponsors, Chemocentrics, Genentech, and Amgen, for their support of the Road to Wellness webinar series. You know, they're helping the Vasculitis Foundation provide these valuable educational webinars and support our commitment to patient education. And just like we had this great webinar on cryo today, watch for more disease-specific webinars this year.
Well done.
All right.